And God's proven faithful, and He's going to prove faithful again in this situation. And so he just simply believes God. Now here comes the third thing, the grade. How does he do? Well, Abraham does pretty good. And then you get to verse number 9, and you see that as he takes the test, he does really good. Verse 9, notice all these action words. And they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. What a sight. I don't know how long it took him to build the altar. I don't know how he bound Isaac and got him on the altar, but he did. And without hesitation, he draws the knife and picks it up and gets ready to thrust it through and watch his son die. And God says, you've passed the test. You have passed the test, because God interrupts him in verse 11. And the angel of the Lord, which is an Old Testament theophany, an Old Testament pre-incarnation appearance of the Lord Jesus, the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad. Here's what we learn. Abraham's faith is affirmed. The angel of the Lord Jesus, stops him from killing the lad, stops him from killing Isaac. And he tells him this in verse number 12. Now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Can I just go ahead and tell you, verse 12 gave me fits this week. In fact, not just verse 12, 3 words out of verse 12 absolutely gave me fits. You know what they were? Now I know. You say, why in the world that give you fits? We serve a God that knows all things. Would you agree with that? Knows all things. Nothing ever occurs to God. We serve a God who is eternal. Time is of no value to him. And yet, in verse 12, in 3 words, we have the eternal speaking like he's in time. And we have the all-knowing speaking like he's been enlightened into a truth that he previously did not know. How can God, who knows all things, who declared the end from the beginning, who inhabits eternity, how can he say, now I know? Does God not know our hearts? I mean, some people would look at this and they would see that as God was watching Moriah and God was watching Abraham, God was sitting up in heaven sweating, thinking, will he or will he not? Will he kill Isaac or won't he kill Isaac? Does he believe in me or don't he believe in me? Listen to me. God never has that issue. You know why? 1 Chronicles chapter 28 and verse 9 says this, For the Lord searcheth all hearts and understandeth all imaginations of all thoughts. In other words, he knows our mind. He knows our heart. He knows our thoughts. He knows our imaginations. He knows whether or not Abraham has faith in him. He knows before he hands out the test if he's going to pass it or not. How can he say, now I know? Now, it may not tear you up like it tore me up, but I've had a struggle with it. And thankfully, let me give you what I believe God's saying here. Did God know? Absolutely, he knew it. But here's what God's doing. God is speaking in terms that Abraham is familiar with, that Abraham can relate to. For instance, when God comes into Eden after Adam sins and he says, Adam, where art thou? Did God not know where Adam was? He knew exactly where he was. Why ask the question? He asked the question to get a response out of Adam. He asked it not for his benefit, but for Adam's benefit. The same is true here with Abraham. God makes this statement not because he was enlightened, not because he just understood what had happened with Abraham, But he makes this statement in a way that would affirm Abraham's faith to Abraham. Now, what in the world am I saying about this? Here's what I'm saying. I want you to imagine, about like what we did with Kennedy, I want you to imagine two parents who's in a swimming pool with their child. Their child's got floaties on. You've watched the child swim with floaties on for half the summer, and you know they can swim. You've watched the technique. You've seen them. You just know they can swim. So what do? You test that child. Not because you don't know. You know in your heart they can do it. You take the floaties off. One parent stands over here with the child. The other parent stands over there. The father looks at the child and he says, why don't you try coming and swimming to me? I really don't know if you can do it or not. In his heart, he knows the child can do it. And so the child, because he hears that on his level that he can understand, launches forward, takes off, and begins to swim to their father. They swim to their father. The father picks them up and embraces them, and he says this, oh, well, I guess you can swim now. I guess you can swim now. They already knew before the child kicked off that the child could swim. But why do they say, I guess you can swim now? They say it for the benefit of the child. They say it on the level that the child can understand and that the child can perceive that, yes, he has been approved by his father. He has done something. That's exactly what God does to Abraham here. If you think it's hard for a parent to affirm a child swimming in a pool, could you imagine how hard it would be for an infinite, eternal, completely holy God to speak to a finite, earthly, completely temporal human being and say, you got it? That's what God is doing with these words, now I know. It's not about God, it's about Abraham. It's God saying to Abraham, see, you do believe me, you do trust in me, and this affirmation is for Abraham's sake, not God's. Abraham's faith was affirmed. God's faithfulness was affirmed. Look in verse 13. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said, to this day, in the mount of the Lord it has been seen. I used to be of the opinion, I thought when Abraham and Isaac started up one side of the mountain, God started the ram up on the other side of the mountain. But I have changed my opinion on that. I think the ram was up there before Abraham and Isaac ever left wherever they left from 3 days ago. Why? Because God knew when he called him to sacrifice Isaac, whether or not he had faith or not. It did not surprise God. It didn't take him by surprise.